de David Castells-Quintana, que es de la UAB, del Departamento de Aplicada. Es profesor agregado y trabaja temas de development, development growth, también cosas de regional economics, inequality y también algo de medio ambiente. Entonces, como es bastante productivo en los últimos años, como podéis ver si miráis la web, y hace temas muy interesantes. Entonces, ella ha colaborado con nosotros recientemente en una defensa de tesis que se hizo online, pues no podía venir, y he aprovechado para pedirle al menos hacer un seminario para venir presencialmente. Antes se había venido ya una actividad que había organizado José María, así que ya ha estado aquí. Entonces, pues gracias por venir y es un placer tenerte aquí.
Eso es, ¿no? Sí. Vale, pues muchas gracias por la presentación, por invitarme. Siempre es un placer estar aquí. Como bien explicado, ya he venido algún par de veces a las conocidas y siempre un placer venir aquí a la Ruina Reus a estar con ustedes. Entiendo que tengo más o menos 45 minutos, una hora. Sí. Y entiendo que hago la presentación en inglés, ¿no?
Sí.
Okay, so
Sí.
I'll switch to English now. So let me get ¿cómo va esto? ¿The slides ready?
Ahí.
Esto es muy moderno para mí.
El PowerPoint.
No, lo voy a minimizar.
No, just minimize that.
No sé.
Tiene que compartirse. Eso sí, sí. No está compartido todo. Ok.
Se ha de compartir.
Está de compartir.
¿Sabe compartir?
No, aquí. Compartir la... No, de esto
Aquí.
Bueno, sí, pero es que con eso es un poco... No, compartir... Ahí compartéis y compartéis toda la pantalla. Va, a ver.
Y eso lo ejemplo antes, pero sí.
Es fácil.
¿Minimiza?
Ahí.
Sí. Y... Pero yo no va a entrar.
¿No pasa?
No. Okay.
Eso.
Ahora.
Ahora sí.
Sí.
Va.
All right. Okay. So let's get started. So I'm gonna present this paper. Just check again. Yeah. So titled Bright and Green. So it's a global view on density and the trade-off between economic activity and greenness over 1,000 cities. So this is joint work with Melanie, Krause, and Konstantin Reisner. They are in the University of Leipzig. And the paper is pretty simple. So the title basically tries to say everything. So we look at global cities. So we have a sample of over 1,000 cities worldwide. These are usually large cities. And we look at this trade-off. So we basically look at economic activity taking place in cities. Mainly we use nighttime lights. And we match that with data on the greenness of cities. And so the paper is basically this simple idea of studying this potential trade-off. Okay? Just to have, from the beginning, to have clear what we do. So I'm going to motivate a little bit. Of course, stop me whenever you want. No? I think that's the procedure. Yeah? So feel free to stop me whenever you want. So one key motivation, of course, is the fact that we live in a world that is urbanizing very rapidly. You all know that. Okay, so it's expected that 2 additional billion people will be living in cities by mid-century, right? And one point is that this rapid urban growth is mainly happening in cities in lower income countries, right? So most of the urbanizing force nowadays in the world is taking place in lower income countries. And of course, this connects with the need for increased economic activity, right? So this is huge internal migrations from rural to urban areas, and this implies so the need for jobs and economic activity in cities, right? And this is happening at the same time of increasing loss of urban greenness. So as people move into cities and cities grow, they become less green, right? So I'm going to show you some data. And so, of course, so people sacrifice green spaces, and now we have so in many places cities that are less and less green, right? And this is worrying because, of course, urban greenness has they have a lot of sort of benefits. I'm going to go through some of them. So you can think that these are essential for mitigation and adaptation to climate change. So and this connects with other research projects that I have. So of course, climate change moves a lot, so displaces people from rural to urban areas, right? But also, so in cities, what we have is concentration of population that are very exposed to pollution and high temperatures. And you guys have heard of the urban heat island effect. So that's why green spaces are essential to mitigate to climate change, or for mitigation and adaptation. So these green spaces have a lot of benefits, as I said, for the ecology, but of course also for the society. You know? And that's the focus of cities is on the benefits for human beings. Right? So you can think about these two questions. No? So to what extent urban growth is associated with increased economic activity? All right. So these cities grow, but is it true that they are becoming so more prosperous? And so as I was saying, so it is happening at the expense of loss of urban greenness, and that's what we want to sort of study in this video, right? I'm going to show you some pictures, all right, to motivate as well. So you have different cities here, and that's just to give you an idea of what we have in mind. No? So some cities may be very dark, meaning that okay, probably you have a lot of people living there, but not much taking place. And that's not the idea of the city, of course. The idea of the city is to be productive, right? Or cities so that look like this at night, or that look like this during the day. So you have here you have a lot of what we call built-up. No? So I'm gonna talk about the data in a minute. So you have a lot of sort of from the satellite. You see a lot of built-up. Then you can see that if you take a look at the actual picture, so doesn't seem to be much happening in terms of economic activity. And of course, a no green space, and the living conditions here are probably not that great, right? On the other hand, you have cities like this, right, where you have a lot of green space, and if you give me like to choose, then I would probably choose that one, right? But the point is, to what extent, so do I have employment opportunities? Do I have economic activity taking place, right? And or a city like this that probably combines both, and you have a lot of night lights. So a lot of luminosity at night, and it's probably reflecting the fact that a lot of things are going on here, and that there is an economic activity taking place, right? Anyway, just to motivate you, probably familiar with some of the literature, right? Some more pictures. So, sorry, this is in Spanish, right? So, España aprueba 19 proyectos para impulsar la renaturalización de ciudades. So this is to say that this is also an issue in Spain, right? So the government is putting a lot of money, and there are a lot of projects to make cities greener, right? And so there is a list of, you can see that this is very recent, 2022, and 19 projects from 64 sort of calls or proposals. And so this is something that authorities are also very interested in, right? So the regreening of cities. And there are examples of success, no? So one thing is the green belt in Vitoria-Gasteiz. It's a city that has done a lot of efforts to preserve green spaces without sacrificing economic activity. So this is the sort of the surrounding of the cities, Anillo Verde, sort of the belt. But this is also inside the city, so a lot of greening in squares. Here is, as you can see, for instance, a green rooftop. Okay. Barcelona is another usual example of green infrastructure. And so here, for instance, they highlight the fact that in the last years after the COVID pandemic, the city actually recovered a lot of green spaces at the beginning, just like as a sort of positive unintended consequences of the pandemic, but also because of initiatives by sort of the institutions in Barcelona. Right? These are examples outside Spain. So you have this is on the top right is in Budapest. So you can see that this is an area of the city that has sort of became famous because you have a lot of sort of, you can see it combines buildings, and so mainly residential buildings, but also some sort of economic activity and green spaces. You have also this example is in Turkey, if I'm not wrong. So where you have also there have been a lot of projects to recover, and you can see, I like this picture because you can see some like brown spaces and how they try to recover that. So for two parts. Okay. Bottom right is in China, and so also an example of a city you can see in the back. The city that thrives a lot, that grows, but also that preserves green spaces, right? And this is the same city. The two pictures at the bottom are this same city in China, right? Let's get to Reus. So Reus, la tercera ciudad catalana con menos zonas verdes por habitante, so it's one of the worst cities in terms of green space per capita, so this should matter for you guys here in Reus. So this is in 2020, alright? They highlight the fact that there is not enough green space in Reus, but you see that, so I want you to focus on the dates, so this is 2020, 2024, 2024, how it seems that they put in effort to address the issue, right? So se inaugura la nueva fase de la V verde en Reus, so policies to regreen the city, right? And this macro project to make Reus greener and with less concrete, right? Please.
Just by curiosity, which are the first two cities with less green?
Good question. No, I was actually just searching for Reus. It's not like I did an analysis for Catalonia, which could be interesting, right? So then it came to my mind, okay, it could be nice too, but yeah, I'm not comparing. So actually, so remember that in my sample, these are large cities. So in the sample, it's probably just going to be Barcelona or the other cities in my sample are not there, but it would be nice then to probably zoom in and take a look at what's happening in Spain, in Catalonia. Why not? So yeah, so the idea is simple. So we want cities to be bright and green, and that's why we give this title to the paper. So we want them to have economic activity, but they want them to be green in the sense of, again, so higher quality of life for the residents, right? But if you think about the space, then this implies a trade-off, right? So for economic activity, you need space, and for green spaces, you need space, right? So it's like an essential trade-off in the use of urban land. And so what we want to do is just explore how cities cope with this trade-off, right? So we're not aiming at explaining particular mechanisms, but just to see how cities worldwide cope with this trade-off, all right? So I'm going to go quickly through the literature. I'll tell you the aim, I'll guide you through the data, some escalate facts, simple econometric analysis that we have done so far, and then probably summarize some policy implications and a little bit of further research. Okay. So in the literature review, so the idea is so we're going to look at, so basically we have to think about, so economic activity, green spaces, and the other sort of third variable is population, right? So I mean the city is a concentration of population, right? So that's why we focus on density. Right? So we need green spaces for people, we need residential and offices for people, so we're looking at what happens with density, right? And the trade-off between economic activity and green space. I don't know if this is working properly because sometimes no one complains. So let's start with the benefit and cost of density. This is again standard in the urban economics literature. So the more population density you have, usually you have increased productivity, the idea of agglomeration economies, for instance, seminal paper here by Duranton and Puga, right? But not only that, density is always also associated with lower emissions per capita. We have shown that with Melanie and another quote, we have shown that in a recent paper, for also a global sample of cities. So there are pros of density in terms of again, higher economic activity and lower emissions, but there are also costs, so the typical congestion costs. So as cities become bigger and denser, there is more traffic, higher prices, there is higher exposure to pollution, crime, and this is also debated in the literature, right? One thing that hasn't been sort of studied that much is the loss of green space, right? So that's another potential sort of, if you want, cost of congestion. The more people you have, the less green space you're going to have. And again, it's not been studied in detail, at least not at a global level, right? So the focus on urban green space matters, as I was explaining, and there are a myriad of benefits here. You can think of, again, mitigation of emissions and adaptation to higher temperatures, the urban island effect. There is also evidence that, of course, the more urban green spaces you have, the more biodiversity you have in the city. Better health, higher life satisfaction. There is a nice paper that shows how people just can display high levels of life satisfaction when they are close or they can enjoy green spaces. There is more social interaction, and you can probably think of many more benefits of green spaces, right? But of course, for you to have a park, for you to have a green space, you have to probably sacrifice housing and space for economic. Potential contribution. So what we want to do again, so is to add to this literature looking at the impacts of density. There is this Appiel and Pietro Stefani. They summarize the sort of benefits and cost of density, and so basically they highlight that there is little research at the global level, and especially with some environmental dimensions, for instance, green spaces. Okay, and also the fact that there is limited global evidence on these urban land use trade-offs. Okay, so we find some papers close to what we do, but it's usually for sort of selected sample of countries, OECD countries, or for a specific sample of cities in Europe or in Southeast Asia, right? So we expect to contribute providing sort of like a global empirical overview of this co-evolution between density, economic activity, and urban cities, right? As I was saying, we have more than 1,000 cities worldwide. We look at these 3 decades, 1990-2020, right? Studying the trade-off that I already explained. And what I'm going to show you is heterogeneous dynamics between world regions and city types. This is where we have been focusing to sort of, as I was saying, to study how different cities cope differently with the trade-off. And again, it could be based on the income level, mainly, and the city type, sort of the size of the city, right? Alright. So the aim is to study this trade-off. I think I'm repeating myself too much here. So looking at the impact of increased population density, the heterogeneity worldwide that I told you by income and city size, and then based on this, we're going to try to explore a little bit how cities grow and how that may exchange heterogeneous dynamics. All right. So in terms of the data, so we're going to use data on city area, built-up surface, volume, and population. All of this is basically satellite data matched with census data for the population. So we rely on the global human settlement layers. Some of you may be familiar with this, right? So this gives us 1,093 cities. So these are cities that are big enough for us to be able to capture this trade-off. Okay. And what we do that is important is we define some boundaries, right? So we take a look at the sort of what the GHSL defines as the city core in 1985, and we create a boundary here because, so let me try to explain here. What we want to do, so cities grow in area, in population, everything, and we want to study the evolution, right? So it could be difficult to say exactly whether green spaces are going down or up if the city grows in population but also grows in space, right? So that's why, to keep it simple, we're gonna focus on density. So we set an area and we look at what happens in that area. That way, so we only control it so we only exploring population growth, right? But keeping the area fixed. And we do this with 1985 boundaries. So because we're gonna start tracking in 1990. So we set some boundaries in 1985, the core of the city. And when we look at boundaries at sort of close to the end of the period, which is also at 2015, to see, then to capture expansion in area. But in that way, we can look at density and area and sort of disentangle the two things, all right? So I'm going to give you results for the core of the city. I'm going to give you results for the fringe, so the expansion between 1985 and 2015, and then the whole agglomeration, if you want, so the city in 2015. It's a way to do it. Not the best, but the one that we came up with. So, and that allows also to compute our measures sort of easy. So as I was saying, so we're going to look at the core, fringe, and agglomeration, right? So and we're going to rely a lot on because of the sample, most of what we're going to use is remote sensing data, right? So for economic activity, we're gonna proxy with nighttime lights. We're gonna use the two satellites that are traditionally used for this. And again, so it allows us to capture so over time how lights change in a given city, right? And again, that's the literature has shown that it's a good proxy of economic activity, and for a global analysis like this one, that's the best you can do, right? So here there are some technicalities, of course, so you need to rescale lights to correct from some top coding, which happens to the first satellite, match the two satellites, but this is sort of this technical issue that all papers using this sort of data have to face, okay? So yeah, so we're saying, then with this light, we have a measure of intensity in the different boundaries, right? For the sample or for the whole period of analysis, right? And we're gonna match this with proxies of urban greenness, and again, here we rely on satellite data, so we're gonna use NDVI, which is the Normalized Different Vegetation Index, okay? Basically, this NDVI, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the NDVI, so it's basically radiation from plants, right? So this is the idea of the so it's infrared, if I'm not wrong. So light is reflected in different ways depending on the surface, and plants emit a specific sort of infrared light, and that's what the satellite captures, all right? That allows you sort of to capture greenness in the city, okay? So that's a measure that is now commonly used in many papers to study greenness in cities or elsewhere, all right? Now it has a huge advantage, which is again because it's this sort of infrared radiation, so you sort of capture all the greenness in the city, all right? So it's a small plant, it will emit a little bit, so it's an aggregate of the greenness in the city. So that's why we rely on this. So this is going to be our main. But we also look at land cover, right? This is from different satellites. So the land cover, so the advantage of the land cover is that you classify, right? So this is a park, this is agriculture. In some cities you still have places for agriculture, or this is infrastructure, right? So it gives you a closer idea of what is happening in that place. So you will then think that land cover is better. The problem with land cover is that it requires, I don't remember the threshold now, sorry, but these are big spaces. So if you have a small park, you lose it because maybe that area has been classified as residential, but you still have some trees there. Think about where you live, you probably, so it's a residential area with trees, right? The land cover will not consider all of those trees, right? And that's, I enjoy the tree in front of my house, right? And the NDVI will capture that tree as well, okay? Just to give you sort of an idea of how we sort of visually how we prepare the data. So again, so we have all of this remote sensing data, okay? We build this, and you can see, so the red thing would be the 1985 boundary, and then the other thing is sort of the 2015 boundary, all right? And that way we look at the core and the fringe. And so with this shapefiles, if you want, we match, and then we get sort of our index of NDVI, nighttime lights, land cover here, but also, so we also have, again, population and built up. The satellite also tell us how much built up we have, okay? So, and that's basically the what we want to study, the trade-offs here. Okay? So you can see, and of course the evolution over time, because we're going to be working with a panel with fixed effect, so the point is to see how a city goes from 2000 to 2020, here, how the built up surface changes from 2000 to 2020, right? Either nobody's following me or I'm explaining everything really well. Yeah? Okay. So I'll go you, so having how the data is prepared here, and I'm going to show you some maps. Right? So this is just the location of our cities by population size. So again, it's a map that you can probably find elsewhere. So you have the largest cities and smaller cities. Right? So this is just to show you that we have cities worldwide, everywhere, in all regions, different sizes. Okay, so we want to play with this. It's a global sample in the sense of geography, but also in the terms of size. All of these are relatively big cities, but some of them are much bigger than others. This is the change in the 3 decades, right? And here you can see some blue dots is basically the cities not growing much, or actually, so they're getting smaller, and red dots are the cities growing very rapidly. You can see that, of course, the cities that are growing more rapidly are cities in sub-Saharan Africa, and some places in Asia, right? In Europe, most cities are either not growing or actually declining in population. Okay? So, so again, this is interesting for us. We're going to explore this. This is nighttime lights. This is per capita in 2020. So again, you can see that brighter cities are usually cities in US, but also in Europe. So this is telling me these are rich cities, right? So the higher the lights per capita, this is a proxy of income per capita of the one of how rich the city is. Okay, but this is the change. So and here you can see the difference. So in 2020, the richer cities are still so in Europe, in the US. But if you look at the change over the 3 decades, you can see that it's mostly cities in China, in East Asia, right? Some in Africa, right? Some in Latin America. So these are cities where economic activity or well, nighttime lights proxying for economic activity is changing very rapidly.
Whether there is some kind of effect of a potential bias taking into account urban sprawl. So rich cities that are growing extensively, then perhaps the nights in terms of the lights, in terms of density are lower, but these are richer areas. So whether
that's
possible to control for that?
Yeah, no, that's precisely the what makes analysis difficult, and that's precisely why we do sort of the core and the. So what I'm showing you here, this map. Sorry, I think this is the core. So we have to set an area to precisely. So in some cases it's true as you say. So probably the core is getting darker, but the fringe is getting brighter. So when we get results by the different areas, then we can see a little bit of this. I'm going to show you results at the core and at the fringe, and in some cases you'll see that they behave differently. And that's the case, for instance, in Europe, in the sense that in Europe the core of cities in many cases is getting darker, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that there's probably a change in the economic structure. We're using more sort of better lights in the sense that they emit less light. So in high income countries, especially in Europe, the decline in lights may not be a bad thing. May actually be the fact that cities, and we know, are paying a lot of attention to light pollution, and they want to have cities that are a little bit darker because.
And there is also about regulation, because in some European
regulation,
cities,
yes, exactly.
You cannot, let's say, have the same intensity as 20 years before.
Exactly, yeah. But have in mind that this is I'll show you in the results, but this is a particularity of very rich cities, right? So the rest of the cities in the world, they are not even thinking about this. They don't care about whether that's a luxury that we have in Europe, that we can think about that. So this is NDVI. So you can see that, so basically it's telling you that greener cities are usually closer to the equator, as expected, no? Vegetation growth is easier there, right? But this is the change. And again, so this is what we're going to be exploring. And here you see that you also have a lot of everything, no? And so it seems, so it's telling me that it's a lot of heterogeneity. You have cities that are getting greener in rich countries, but also in poor countries, and the same for cities that are getting less green. So you have a mix of everything, okay? And we want to explore this. Surprisingly for us, and that comes also in the results, is that you see a lot of, in China, there is a lot of cities that are actually becoming greener. And I was expecting probably at the beginning, when I didn't know much, you would expect the opposite. But not, simply they have made a huge effort to make cities greener than before.
But this is only showing you this for the center of the city, basically, right? So this different borders that you...
Yeah, sorry, I don't have the note here. I think all of the maps are just the core, yeah.
So I was thinking maybe it's also because of commuting in China, right? So a lot of people are commuting to work, there is a huge development in local transport. I don't know, maybe you could control somehow for commuting, intensive commuting, for instance, in a local area.
It would be beautiful, but for the sample that we have,
like, yeah, okay.
We don't have commuting. But it's true, but in any case, it's a good thing. I mean, even if I don't live in the center and I commute to the center, I want to arrive, as you guys arrive here, and you arrive to a campus where you have some trees and you have some, so.
But you don't have to do it at the city level, you could do it maybe at a regional level or something like that, right? To kind of make regions more comparable, or at least countries more comparable, right? Because it seems that there is something country specific, right, or at least region specific. So China behaves different than Europe. Europe different.
Well, part of the idea is to show you this heterogeneity, all right, across world regions by income, all right. But yeah, the advantage of, so we have the panel in any case, so we're looking at the evolution over time for every city, right? But yeah, so in the result we want to study heterogeneity across regions. So the last thing that I wanted to show you here was the loss in urban greenness in a very simple sort of scatter plot. And this was to show you that globally, so there is a decline, a clear decline in greenness, and that's part of what motivated the paper to say, okay, cities are losing greenness. But again, there is heterogeneity across world regions, as you can see here. So I'm gonna now be splitting about income group, high income countries, upper middle income countries, lower middle income countries, and low income countries, following the classification of them. Okay? And you see that, for instance, in high income countries, there has been an increase in greenness, right? If you look at the trend, so it's against the global trend. The highest decrease in urban greenness takes place in low income countries, right? And so we want to explore this different evolution. So yeah, to study this trade-off between economic activity and greenness, so I'm going to show you now some econometric analysis, all right? We're going to run simple regressions. So the dependent variable is going to be greenness in city I times T, all right? We're going to regress this on light intensity, nighttime light, okay? So nighttime light will be in logs. We cluster errors at the city level. And as you can see, because we have a panel, so we can include city-specific fixed effects and time-fixed effects, right? So we're looking at, again, the evolution over time within each city. And we're going to split the results, as I was saying, between city core, fringe, and urban agglomeration, right? Let me show you some of the first set of results. So this is lights and greenness, our panel results. And so if you look at the main sort of so these first three columns, what you see is that so there seems to be a trade-off there, right? So there is a negative coefficient that is highly significant. So in cities where lights increase, you see a reduction in greenness, right? But what we do in the last column is to say, okay, to what extent this is just automatic, or this is driven by, again, what I was saying at the beginning, this is driven by population and the need that population have, right? And that's what we captured in the last column, right? So basically the idea that the potential trade-off between light and greenness is driven by increased population density. So it's not just automatic of the area, it's the need that people have to, right? So it's all driven by population, and that's why in the next tables I'm going to focus on population, all right? So the role of population density, so we're going to continue with a simple econometric analysis. So where now the key independent variable is going to be population in city I times T, right? And the dependent variable is going to be economic activity, proxied by lights, or greenness, main results, proxied by NDVI, right? But the same strategy, so with two-way fixed effects, or sample of cities, population in logs, because we have two outcome variables. We use a simple multivariate regression model, which is just, it's taking into account that we run in the same but for two different outcome variables, right? And we cluster errors at the city level, right? So these are the results for lights. So basically what we find is that increased density is usually associated with more lights, okay? So that's the first column, if you want, for the global sample, and this is expected, no? So this is the idea of agglomeration economies, and so you have denser cities, you expect that more lights are emitted. Okay, so we find in that, and that's nice. But then you have a little bit of heterogeneity across income regions, right? And that's what I'm trying to show you in the rest of the table. So as I was saying, so if you look at high income countries, or at the core of cities in high income countries, you actually have a negative and significant coefficient. And this is what I was saying, that it seems that the more people actually have reduction in lights, and it's probably, again, adaptation or structure in economic changes in the structure of economic activity or different policies, right? But otherwise, you have a positive and significant coefficient. So here I'm highlighting the whole of the urban agglomeration. And what I want to show you here is that, so if you look at the differences in the coefficients, so the highest of the three is upper middle income countries. It seems that the response to population shocks, if you want, is stronger in upper middle income countries, right? Where you see a higher increase in economic activity due to increases in population. Now we look at greenness, all right? And here what I want to show you is that, so first, that the major drop in greenness is found. So let me keep on with high income countries. Here I was telling you that in the core of cities in high income countries there is a negative coefficient, all right? And the same here for greenness. Okay, so high income countries are losing greenness, right? But if you compare coefficients, so, and especially if you look at, so if you compare upper middle income countries with low income countries, you see that the major drop in greenness is found in the fringe of cities in the low income group, right? So basically the coefficient down here, right? So this loss of greenness seems to be, and again in line with the descriptive stats that I showed you, this loss of greenness seems to be significantly worrying in cities in low income countries, right? In cities in upper middle income countries, actually we get non-significance, right? So in these countries, or cities in these countries, it seems that they are not sacrificing green space that much, or the impact of population shocks is not significant in the loss of urban regions. We do some robustness checks on this. I'm gonna get in detail. So for the lights, we play with the different satellites. So we use only the most recent satellite, and we do other things. Again, on how we rescale the data. Okay. Let me jump to the third one. For NDVI, as I was saying, we use land cover. Also for greenness, we use land cover rather than NDVI, and we still find this impact of this negative impact of population, so the loss of greenness. We introduce interactions rather than splitting the sample that allow us to compare coefficients better as well. We do several things. And another thing that we do is, so I don't know if this is a robustness check, or for me it wasn't, but for my co-authors it was relegated to a robustness check. It was to study by city size, because I think that was interesting. And so we find something that, so as I was expecting, that the population light elasticity increases with city size. So in cities over 1 million, more population, more lights, right? But in cities over 5 million, it is more than proportional. In cities of over 10 million, it's more than proportional, even more. And this would be in line with the story of agglomeration economies, and that the larger the city, the more agglomeration economies you have, and the higher the response in lights. So I found that interesting. Again, in line with evidence, but I had not seen it in a global sample like this. And in terms of greenness, we find, and again, that would be expected, that the negative coefficient is especially high in magnitude in the city cores of mega cities. So these mega cities produce a lot of light, right? But in the core, that's at the expense of green space. So in mega cities, in the core of mega cities, there is a huge sacrifice of green space. And you could think, of course, the value of land, right? So if you are in the city center of a large city, land becomes super expensive, right? And you want to benefit from that to build probably skyscrapers for offices, right? Or very expensive residential buildings. So there is a huge opportunity cost of having a park, right? If no one wants to live in the center, you leave a park. But if everyone wants to be in the city center, there is a huge opportunity cost. And that's why we see a huge loss in greenness, right? If anything of what I'm saying doesn't make sense, please let me know. This is work in progress.
Yeah, but just, okay, because obviously you have a limited space. You can either create a park, you can either use this to build. So it's not an obvious relationship. I mean, which is the alternative? Is there a way to create more green without losing population?
I want to get to that. So at the beginning you would think that it's automatic, but the point is that, I mean, there is a space, you already see it in the heterogeneity. So there are ways to try to maximize the use space in the sense of produce economic activity, but somehow try to save on your green spaces as well, right? So at the end, we want to get to, of course, to policy option on how to manage the city without, and so for the city to grow, host more people and produce more stuff and be more productive, but also keeping green spaces there, right? And that was sort of the pictures at the beginning, These are these projects like in Reus or in Vitoria, and I'll show you more examples of how to regreen the city without losing economic activity. Right? So it's a challenge that cities face.
I was helping the city.
It's magic.
Pardon?
It's magic more than a challenge.
No, but
unless you create green spaces at the top of
for instance, yeah, so there are solutions, that the idea of the regreening solution. So one solution is that one, is so to have space or built up for office and housing, and then you have green space, the rooftop, or vertical gardens, or the combination of spaces like we do in Barcelona. So it doesn't have to, the green space doesn't have to be a huge park. In London, that's the strategy. In London, you have residential areas with a huge park, right? And I love that, because then it's like you are in London, but you're in the forest, right? But it doesn't have to be like this. It could be just I walk out of my house and I see green space. I give you an example in Barcelona, Castells-Quintana. Huge debate about I cannot drive my car. Blah, blah. I did that for car owners. I don't own a car, but for those. So if I was to live in Castells-Quintana, before I will walk out and just see cars. Now I walk out and I see a little bit of garden. The city remains the same. It's still as productive, or probably more productive, because that has increased tourism, more restaurants, right? So you're producing more economic activity, more jobs, but you also then regreening the city. So I'm not saying that what they did in Konstantin, I'm not gonna like, but it's an option to regreen the city without losing economic activity.
I was helping the city council of Reus about this project, the Renato project 2-3 years ago, and
Great.
And then for them, they were thinking only about regreening the city, but they didn't have in mind an idea about which was going to be the impact of that on economic activity. So they were focused on regreening. So all the, let's say, the potential externalities in terms of modifying economic activity as a consequence of that, that's out of the scope of their...
Yeah, exactly. That's precisely what we want to bring here. So probably not giving Reus the solution, but the idea that you have to think about, this is a trade-off, right? If you only think about green, of course, and then get buildings out and just more parks, right? So you have to think about, it's a land use challenge or trade-off.
No, the other thing is that, of course, there's a public policy to say, to make cities greener, but the thing is that, of course, there is a trade-off in economic activity, but also probably also in the in which economic activity do we have?
Sure.
Because, of course, it's not the aim of the paper, but probably is a topic for another paper with another sample or whatever, or do a case study of how people decide this and how it modifies, the landscape of the economic activity of that.
Sure. That would be nice, and that's sort of in line with the story of cities in high-income countries, no? That there is some structural or economic transformation that is leading to a city that is more productive, but also greener. Here for us is a challenge of data, but that would be nice, no? To see exactly what type of economic activity is taking place. So having these results in mind, what I'm going to try to show you is different patterns of city growth. And so here we're basically going to rely on the fact that we have data on built-up surface and volume, right? So I want you to think about cities hosting more population. They can either increase the area, and we're going to study this with core fringe, all right? Or for a given area, increase the density, right? And to increase density, you basically can either increase built-up surface, so in the area that you have, build more, and that's probably going to sacrifice green spaces. So I have offices here, I need more space, and there is a park here. I buy parks and I buy more, but it's in the area of the city. So that's what we call filling in, right? So you're basically filling in empty spaces that could be green spaces, right? Or you could be build higher, right? Now, build higher sounds like a nice strategy, so vertical expansion, But have in mind that building higher is very expensive, and it costs. There is good research on this and how the cost increase exponentially with height, right? And that's why you don't see. Sometimes you wonder why don't I see more skyscrapers, because they are very expensive to build, right? And very difficult, very expensive. So vertical expansion is costly. Or the other option that you have, which is cheaper, is fitting more people in the same volume, crowding in, right? So Carlos, now you have to share your office with Bernd, right? Because there is no more space. Or in the house, no? That's what we see in low-income countries. Well, sadly, we also see that. It's actually in El País today. That we see that in Madrid, in Barcelona. So you're going to have to fit more people per volume, right? So unfortunately, we do not have data on crowding in for the global sample. There are good examples for specific cities, but we do have built-up surface and volume, so we can get at least a proxy on what is happening, all right? And distinguish cities that are then probably increasing on vertical expansion or filling in or crowding in, all right? That's so where we are now. I'll show you some simple results that we have. Well, this is actually just looking at evolution, so changes in these variables over time. And you can take a look at the table. Let me go to the site. So you can see that cities in low-income countries have become particularly dense. So this is cities in low-income countries have been growing a lot, right? Growing a lot, both in population and area, but especially in population. So they are becoming very dense, right? To the point that they now have a density that is 3 times higher of cities in high-income countries, right? So these are very, very dense cities, right? But this density in lower income countries is mainly characterized by low built-up volume per capita. Actually, a third of that in high income countries. Right? So the data is already giving us an idea that cities are growing differently. And in lower income groups, cities are growing by mainly either filling in, which is cheaper than building higher, or crowding in, putting more people in the same space, right? And that, especially in low-income countries, is probably suggestive of slums, or some of the pictures that I showed you at the beginning, where you have a little volume per capita. So what I was trying to do in this table is to take you to compare low-income countries with upper middle-income countries. In upper middle-income countries, it's the opposite, right? So different. Right? So actually crowding, if you look at this -10, crowding has actually declined. They have built so much. Think about cities in China. China is upper middle income country. So cities in China, they also have a lot of, these cities have grown a lot in population. But they're building so much, we see it in the news. They're building at such a fast pace that volume per capita has actually increased, right? There's a race between population and built-up volume. In low-income countries, that race is won by population by far. In upper middle-income countries, they're building more rapidly. We do a couple of simple regressions, which I'm not happiest about this regression, but just to start getting some evidence of what is happening. So here we regress built-up surface on density. And again, so basically it's to show you that in cities, in upper middle income countries, there is a higher response in built-up surface. The idea that again, that when they have population, they build more and they build more, or much more and faster if you want, right? Which is not the case in low income countries, right? They have, so what this regression is suggesting is that a population shock in low income countries is not necessarily associated with an increase in built-up surface. And again, this is suggestive of crowding in. Where is these people going? They just have to share the already made space with others.
One question, please.
Yeah.
Which is the difference between the boundaries in 1885 and
so the city core and so 1985 is when we delineate the city as so based on what the GHSL calls the city core in 1985, and we keep that boundary fixed. So everything else in the panel has time variation, but the boundary is fixed, and we do that again to be able to talk about density. If you want to see what is happening outside the boundary, then you look at the fringe or the 2015 boundaries, and then we can see what is happening at the fringe. I mean, it's a way that we thought about sort of, because if we leave area to vary and population to vary, so you will have density going up, going down, but we don't know because its area has increased, because population has increased, right? Like this, is clear that it's either a density that increased or an area that increased in the fringe.
So this is not about administrative boundaries?
No.
Functional units. Okay.
Sort of, yeah, based on the GHSL, which is basically, so the GHSL classifies pixels on so how many people and how dense that pixel is. And with that, they define cores and agglomerations. So we use that, we just delineate. So we take a rule and say, okay, in 1995, how many pixels have been classified as urban core, and that's the urban core, right? And we do the same in 2015, and then that's the other. Okay.
And what about if in an area you have, let's say, a very strong growth process, and then some areas melt down, so there is some kind of areas that disappear because they become the same. Have you found this in some very dense areas in Europe, for instance, in which cities are growing, so they become closer?
That they merge between.
Yeah,
so it could be. Yeah. So I think we checked that the sample is homogeneous at the beginning and at the end, so that we don't have a splitting or merging of cities. So yeah, but I guess we could. It is true that in some cases, so they make it closer to each other. But the other point that you made on administrative units, that's also interesting, and there is research of guys using similar data on how administratively fractured the city is, and that could be interesting as well. So if I look at this urban agglomeration using remote sensing, is that just one single municipality, or is that 25 municipalities? So what I have seen is that, of course, they show that the more fractured it is, the performance is worse in terms of everything, right? Infrastructure.
Yeah, but it is about national legislation, because what is a city in a given country is not a city in another. So.
Yeah, that's what motivates the whole project of the GHSL, no? To say, let's forget about how countries define cities. Let's define cities based on satellite data on population and build-up, right? And we define some thresholds, and that gives me whether this is urban or rural, whether I can classify this as an urban core, as the fringe of the city. Okay. So, leaving national classification aside. I'm going to try to speed up here. So as I was saying, so this is then regressing volume on density and surface. And what we see here, so basically we see two things. That it seems that volume, so basically responds more to surface, okay? And a bit less, but again, the coefficients are not that different in upper middle income countries. And so what we don't have here is so remember, volume is surface times height. So what this is telling me is that in those places where the coefficient is smaller, in upper middle income countries, then height is playing a higher part, right? So in low income countries, if volume increases, it's basically sort of flat expansion, slumps, while in where the coefficient is smaller, so in upper middle income countries and high income countries, it's probably because they are also building higher, right? And finally, this is lights on population and surface. So what I show you here again, the distinction between upper middle income countries and low income countries, how lights respond significantly to both surface and population here, and they don't here. So again, the idea that in low income countries, there is probably a lot of crowding in, and not that much an increase in build-up. Right? Then we zoom into sort of to give you names. We look at some large cities among our sample of large cities. So these are cities of over 3 million, just to have something that we can see. And we look at then the 2 dimensions that we have. So changes in light and greenness, right? And we can classify the cities on their performance, right? And this is always to give you an sort of also to come back to your point. So here you have the dispersion. Say that, I mean, it's not sort of one line that it was automatic. Cities have different patterns. So on this quadrant, you will have cities that are losing on economic activity, if you want, or where we see a decline in lights, but an increase in greenness. And these are cities like Montreal, Madrid, few cities in high-income countries, as I was saying. These are cities that probably, I mean, they emit now less light, and that's probably not something, I mean, not necessarily something bad. And where we know there have been re-greening initiatives. For instance, in Montreal, Montreal was famous for a lot of projects to re-green parts of the city. In Madrid, you could think of Madrid, Rio, and other projects that also have been put in place to increase greenness in Madrid, right? So that would be this quadrant here. This quadrant here, so top right is cities where both greenness and lights have increased. And as you can see, these are mainly cities in upper middle income countries. A lot of Chinese cities, what I told you was surprising to find so many Chinese cities. Some cities in high income countries like Berlin, and other cities especially in medium income cities, in upper middle income countries and lower middle income countries. Let me give you the example of Berlin, for instance. It's a city that has had a lot of brown spaces, so empty spaces due to historical reasons, and they have done a lot of effort to recover those spaces, either to have some economic activity or green areas. There is a famous project in Berlin, which is the old airport, which was massive and was right at the center of the city mainly, and now it's a huge park, right? So that's probably reflected in the data. So these are cities that are making an effort again, or making an effort. In the data, they show to do better in terms of increasing lights as a proxy of economic activity and becoming green, right? Now the bottom right is where we see the trade-off in place. In these cities, you have an increase in lights, so you have more economic activity, right? But at the expense of a decline in green, right? And you can find cities like Kampala, Addis Ababa, Dar es Salaam. This is mainly cities in low-income countries, right? And there is a lot of evidence of how these cities have grown, basically by eating up green space. There is a park here, now offices. They don't care, and they've been sacrificing green space, right? Last, we do a bright and green index. Very simple index where we combine the two things. And just to give you some, so this will be the ranking in 2020. It's still a lot of cities in high-income countries, but we already start to see some cities in upper middle-income countries. So this is because, I mean, again, there is luminosity and greenness, right? The top in our ranking is Houston, then Washington DC, Detroit, right? So you have Buenos Aires is there. Buenos Aires is a city that combines very well built up with green space, right? So this is the ranking and this is the change. It's to see the evolution, right? And you can see how a lot of cities in China are coming up, right? So they have done very well, not only in terms of economic activity, that wouldn't surprise you, but also in terms of greenness, and that's a little bit more surprising, right? And we also have one city in a lower middle income country, which is Jakarta, right? Also has been an increase in light and green, right? Barcelona is there, right? So as I mentioned Barcelona, so the fact that Barcelona is not only high in the ranking, but also in the increase from 1990 to 2020. So it's good, it reflects again that Barcelona keeps its economic activity, but is able to re-green parts of the city. I'm going to leave it there. So just to summarize, so what we do in the paper is to explore this coevolution between, as I said, these three main variables: density, economic activity, and greenness. For our global sample, so if you wanted to take off from the top, so increases in density are associated with more lights, okay, expected, but there are differences across regions. This happens especially in large cities, as I told you, large cities in upper middle income countries, and not so much in cities in low income countries, right? In terms of greenness, it's actually in large cities in low income countries where we see the highest decline, and not so much in cities in upper middle income countries, right? So there are the heterogeneous results that we try to explain based on growth patterns, right? And what I was saying, that results for the moment suggest that there is horizontal as well as vertical expansion with economic activity and a protection of green spaces in cities in upper middle income countries. And as I told you, these cities actually show the largest increase in our bright and green index. By contrast, in low income countries, especially in the city core of large cities in low-income countries, there is suggestive evidence of high crowding in, probably slum formation, right? You can imagine that this has policy implications, as I was saying, so how to manage these land use trade-offs, and this matters for urban planning, and so again, as Maria was saying, so policies aimed at one thing or the other need to take into account this trade-off, not just to focus on one thing, right? Ongoing research, we're trying to give some theory to this, so trying to understand, again, especially for policy making, think about the optimal provision of green spaces, because we see that most of the results come from large cities. We're trying to study the role of spatial structure, whether the city is more monocentric or polycentric, all right? Then for a subsample of cities, we can then also study inequalities within cities, so access to green space, not the same that my city is green, but where is that green for me, right? And then take a look at more specific cities. I gave you some examples. We have taken a look at Berlin, Madrid, and some cities. We could do more, of course, and get deeper in what is happening in each city. All right? I'm going to leave it there. I hope I didn't go up too much over time. Thanks a lot. Further questions or comments?
I have a question regarding your proxy of economic activity. So you use this brightness or light intensity?
Yeah, light intensity.
So, I mean, light is expensive, energy is expensive, and the prices are different according to the countries.
Yeah.
And you had some energy crisis, which specific policies to try to substitute perhaps more intensive light use for other light use.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you compare Europe with the US or with China, shouldn't this affect this? And you might also have different tendencies over time, right?
Sure.
Because energy prices have jumped up more recently.
No, all that is true. So what we do in the econometric approach is to try to control for that with fixed effects, with two-way fixed effects, right? In some regressions, we also have time trends that will sort of control for the fact that you have different trajectories. But it's true. I mean, it's just a proxy so this has been shown to be a good proxy precisely in these sort of studies, global studies, right? If you wanna go more specific and say something about it, for instance, compare Berlin with New York in terms of the light emitted, that it wouldn't be a good proxy, right? But globally like this, so if you want to look at long-run evolution, it's been shown to be decent proxy. And again, it's the best that we have so as a proxy for income, the global level right now is the best we have, and that's why many papers use it.
In development economics, actually, it's a very often used proxy, right? So light intensity is very often used as proxy for development economics.
Exactly.
And for the
economic development, yeah.
And I was actually wondering from the beginning, when we started to talk about light intensity and environment, I was directly thinking about Kuznets environmental Kuznets curve and development literature. I mean, you kind of move more to regional and urban literature, but I think it would be maybe also interesting for you to kind of look at this. I mean, for the framing of the paper, I think it could be
good suggestion, thanks. Yeah, because we kind of see it when what I said about cities in high-income countries showing the decline, so that could be suggestive of a sort of environmental Kuznets curve in terms of emission of lights. Yeah, good suggestion, thanks. Yeah, okay, thanks a lot. I really enjoyed it.